So we thought what we would do here today is talk about some spectrum ideas, CBRS, 6 gigahertz, and millimeter wave opportunities. And we have experts in all 3 of those subjects with us today. And our panel consists of Pete Young from Comsearch. Hello, Pete. Kyriakos Vergos from INTRACOM. And Andreas Bitzarakis from Select Spectrum. They gave me the hard names, like Pete Young. Anyway, I just figured I'd pull off. So without further ado, well, let me have you guys introduce yourselves first, and then we'll go through the deck. So a couple minutes on who you are and why you're here.
So my name is Peter Young. I'm with Comsearch. I've been with Comsearch for 32 years. I started out as a frequency coordinator for point-to-point microwave systems, quickly moved into software development. Currently, I'm serving as the 6 GHz chair in the Wireless Innovation Forum, setting the standards for 6 GHz unlicensed standard power devices. I'm also the manager, product manager for this 79 GHz database that Comsearch runs, as well as various other sundry products within Comsearch.
Hi, Kyriakos Vergos. I got into this industry initially by founding an ISP, that later became a fully-fledged mobile cellular carrier, a Tier 1 carrier, in fact, in Europe. I was the founder and CEO of that. Then I moved on to acquiring a Motorola business unit, which I spun off, and that was a vendor that specialized in fixed wireless access technology. I have also been general manager of Airspan Networks, one of the fairly well-known vendors in this space too. And I am today here as Chief Commercial Officer of INTRACOM TELECOM worldwide, and I'm also the CEO of INTRACOM TELECOM USA, our subsidiary in the US.
Before we get started here, let's get a huge round of applause for Steve Coran. That pronunciation, you're like 25% Greek after you pronounce those 2 names here. Huge round of applause. 30%. Andreas Bitzarakis, Managing Director of Broadband at Select Spectrum. Select Spectrum is a licensed spectrum brokerage and advisory firm. We represent clients over about 25 licensed frequencies, ranging from 150 megahertz up to 40 gigahertz. So as you can imagine, encompassing so many different applications, use cases, industries, including but not limited to the wireless ISP industry. Happy to be here.
Okay, let's turn it over to Peter to talk to us about unlicensed 6 gigahertz topics. Let's hold questions to the end. We should have some time at the end. So, and there is a mic here, so when we get there, just queue up and we will do our best to answer your questions. Thanks.
All right, so I'm going to basically do a quick intro to unlicensed 6 gigahertz and covering the different unlicensed device types, the regulatory environment, how to access the standard power licensed 6 gigahertz and interference reporting. We have 3 main categories of unlicensed devices. We have very low power, which is used for both indoors and outdoors. Very low power, 14 dBm per channel, minus 5 dBm per megahertz for things like VR goggles, smart glasses, in-car Wi-Fi. Next, we have the low power indoor devices, which can go up to 30 dBm or 5 dBm per megahertz for access points obviously within houses. And we have their standard power devices, which are fixed indoor or outdoor at 36 dBm per channel, 23 dBm per megahertz. But those require, in order to protect fixed service incumbents, those need to use an AFC, automatic frequency coordination system, to provide its location so that we make sure that we provide a channel list that don't cause interference to those incumbents. In both the low power indoor and the standard power devices, there are clients that operate 6 dB below its associated access point power. Standard power devices have a special class of fixed clients called a fixed client device, which is also can transmit from 36 dBm power, but it needs to get its channels from the AFC as well, providing its location. The FCC sort of poised, for lack of a better term, to come out with another order on very low power, which allows 5 dBm or allows up to 1 dBm per megahertz, still 14 dBm per channel through the use of geofenced exclusion zones, where an AFC-like device would provide a map of where it can operate on what channel, and then the device just knows where it's located and figures out where it fits in the map. A little bit different from an AFC. But moving on, WinForum is has, along with the Wi-Fi Alliance, established all the technical parameters and the specifications for how the AFC system would work with the standard power devices. The FCC basically set the regulations on what was going to be allowed, whereas WinForum as well as Wi-Fi Alliance to define how it was going to be implemented. From soup to nuts, it went from like figuring out how the AFC is going to actually calculate the channels using the propagation models the FCC dictated. There was a lot of open stuff there. So, needless to say, we've come through the phase. We've been in operation for a year and a half in the United States, and now we're seeing that we need to make some refinements. One of those refinements is that we use the National Lane Clutter data set from the USGS to define whether a device is in urban, suburban, or rural locations, so that we can apply clutter losses. Well, we found that there's a lot of roads that are identified as urban in rural areas. So Tom Willis from AT&T, part of the WinForum, basically proposed an algorithm to remove the roads sort of from the NLC data, and we are in the middle of testing that and getting ready to deploy that to the AFCs to help improve protection for the fixed service incumbents. We also have another stakeholder that deals with the power and utility industry that is concerned about the close-in access points and devices that are close to these fixed service systems. The current model doesn't really use clutter height data at all, so that's this next proposal is the fixed service licensees will provide clutter height data to the AFCs that will be agreed upon so that we can provide additional protection close into those access points. Those two items can be done without actually any interaction from the FCC. We will likely notify the FCC that we're doing this, but these were all in the purview of what the WinForum had set up for specifications. The next two are more directly things that we're going to need the FCC to allow us to do, which is the addition of directional antennas. Right now, the standard power access points assume an omnidirectional antenna for purposes of protection of the fixed service, but obviously with fixed wireless access, it's using directional antennas, so we want to take advantage of those antenna patterns to get more channels for the fixed wireless access. Likewise, the fixed client devices that I described before are not allowed to use the 6 gigahertz band to get its channel list, so it needs to connect to the internet somehow. So one of the ideas that we borrowed from CBRS is to have a beacon where the fixed client device would be able to transmit very short periods of time back to the standard power access point that it's serving it on that same channel so that it can actually get its list of channels through that system. Lastly, one of the things we're working on is metrics. We have, because the Wi-Fi devices or the rules do not really require us to do power aggregation for determining whether we're going to cause interference to fixed service incumbents. There's no need to share like we do in CBRS to share the device locations and everything else. So no one really knows what the other AFC providers are doing in terms of volume. So we're creating a voluntary specification to submit to a non-partial third party the data so that we can actually see how well 6 gigahertz standard power at least is being deployed in the area. So it was provided AFC. There's 9 providers in the United States and 4 in Canada. We can read through them all, but it went from an initial 7, and then we added Axon and the C3 Spectra after the fact. Internationally, US and Canada has implemented standard power, and then it looks like we've got Colombia and Saudi Arabia have proposed rules, and a bunch of other places are evaluating the feasibility. United Kingdom looks like they might be next, and or Australia, with Europe and the rest of Europe and Brazil coming in behind. How do you access the AFC? How do these get channels? We have the specification provides a REST API, requires daily inquiry to make sure that there's no new fixed service incumbents or licensees that have come online. And this inquiry requires a device identifier and a serial number along with its location, uncertainty, and height information so that we can properly calculate what is going on, what channels they need. The response is a list of channel IDs and power in EIRP, or they can also do a frequency range, almost like a power spectral density type of thing. Lastly, interference reporting. Why I want to get this out there. I think these slides are going to be shared with everyone. So if you're a fixed service incumbent and you think you're getting some interference, you can go to this portal to submit your interference request, including the when you were actually or over what period you were experiencing interference, report the call sign, coordinates, frequency, bandwidth, height, azimuth, etc. And then that form gets actually sent out to all the USAFC providers. It will then also copy the FCC on it so that they're made aware. It's a nice one-stop place to go and report potential interference. So the FCC is overseeing that interference process and steps in as needed. So that's 6 characters of license.
Kyriakos.
Can you hear me again?
Oh, the microphone, that's for.
Oh, right. All right, so the panel right after lunch, that's called the dead zone. Everybody wants to have a power nap. But if you're a WISP, I assure you this is not the time to nap. This is the time to listen, because there are 2 things I'm going to cover in my 10 minutes chat. And they come together as enablers of a brand new tool for a WISP's toolbox. One is millimeter wave spectrum. The other is a brand new technology called hybrid massive beamforming. A bit of a mouthful, hybrid massive beamforming. We'll talk about that in a minute. So, if you're a WISP, up until very recently, you had this to deal with. You've all seen this map 1,000 times, I guess, most of you at least. There's still a dearth of broadband across the nation. And if you're a WISP, up until recently, you would use either unlicensed spectrum and unlicensed band technologies, take advantage of that unlicensed spectrum, or you would use CBRS spectrum to offer fixed wireless access to your subscribers. As of today, there is a new kid in town, which is called millimeter wave spectrum, licensed millimeter wave spectrum. You combine that with this new technology called hybrid massive beamforming, and you get, as I said, a brand new, very powerful tool to offer your subscribers high-speed internet service and hopefully make a lot of money without resorting to fiber. What is hybrid massive beamforming? Well, initially I had a slide with 3 times the content that you see here. Steve very quickly put paid to that. So I'm going to be very brief. Essentially, you take what are fairly well-known, well-established technologies such as digital beamforming and analog beamforming, phase shift array beamforming. To do one or the other is fairly complex, but it's been done, and people have been doing it for years. To combine the two has been a little bit of the holy grail in RF engineering, but now it's been achieved successfully. And with that, you now unlock the immense power and potential of licensed millimeter wave spectrum, where previously, as we all know fairly well, millimeter wave spectrum gives you lots of capacity, but it's very problematic because you don't normally get the distance, you have issues with weather, etc., etc. Well, with hybrid massive beamforming for the first time, you have a way to successfully deal with these challenges. And you can reach very major distances, up to 5 miles or even beyond. 5 miles, that's a lot. And you can achieve 124,024 QAM of modulation, which is extremely high, and yet you can keep that link going at a distance, and even with severe weather, which previously was not doable. Now it is, with hybrid massive beamforming. So suddenly you have, as I said before, a brand new, very powerful tool that you can take advantage of. Why is it not passing on to the next slide? No. So why is this available now and wasn't available before? Because, well, as far as the technology is concerned, it's about as close to rocket science, in my opinion, as you can get in the world of RF engineering and RF system design and development. This slide just gives you a very initial sort of taste of how complex this stuff is. We're talking about antenna arrays of up to 600 and plus antenna elements. All these little slots you see in those 4 panels, they're all separate antenna elements. So a total of up to 600 or more of them together, forming a massive beamforming system. It's hybrid because, as I mentioned before, it's part digital beamforming and part analog. In a single 90-degree sector, you have 30 up to 31 beams covering the sector and aligning perfectly with pencil beam, very narrow width beams, aiming right at the CPE, achieving, as I said, really very great distances, comparatively speaking, compared to older millimeter wave systems. And they can punch through some pretty nasty weather in ways that previously was unheard of. So it is groundbreaking stuff. It is complex, intricate science, but it works, I can assure you, and it's commercially available today. How come this licensed spectrum is available now? Well, there are several ways to get cost-effective licensed millimeter wave spectrum today, ways which were not available to you up until very recently. Andreas will go through some of that later. He's an expert in all this. I will just offer just some examples. You've got 2 groups that actually are present at the show this year. One is called Geolinks, the other is called Broadband One. They are operators who happen to own a lot of millimeter wave band spectrum, and now for the first time they've chosen to open it up and to offer it to WISPs in a kind of a wholesale franchise kind of model. It's cost effective, and I would encourage any WISP interested in this stuff to talk to them. But bottom line, there is today, and please by all means come to me after the panel or at any time during the show, and I can fill you in on more details. But bottom line, there is licensed spectrum available for WISPs of any size in ways that was not previously available before. Licensed millimeter wave spectrum was previously the monopoly of the big tier 1 carriers. That is no longer the case. Please do look at this. It's serious, it's available, it's happening, and it's a brand new tool for you. The advantages of licensed millimeter wave spectrum and this latest generation of hybrid massive beamforming technologies compared to other systems, well, again, I'm not going to get too much into it, there's not enough time, but compared to 5G, there are advantages because you don't need a great, big, very expensive or very complex top rate core, IP core. Against fiber, it's more economic to deploy and much faster to deploy, so there are time to market advantages. Versus unlicensed fixed wireless access, well, obviously the obvious one, you don't have interference to worry about. Others talk about mitigating interference. Here you're talking about a zero interference environment. And against satellite, well, obviously much more capacity and much lower latency. Obviously, any technology and even the spectrum, you need to match them to specific use cases if you're going to maximize the benefit. To help out you being on your way in studying this new tool, this new option, I will give you the heads up that it's especially useful and profitable if you can go and serve a subscriber base of what I would call high-end single family dwelling units, single family dwellings that are willing to pay a little more for top-notch, high-capacity, highly reliable service, carrier-grade service. It does very well with MDUs, multi-dwelling units, and multi-tenant environments, so for enterprise as well. And in all sorts of environments, be they rural, suburban, or urban. Again, other technologies that do very well in fixed wireless access, they may do very well in rural settings, not so well necessarily in urban settings. With licensed millimeter wave, and with these new technologies, you can do urban too. So to recap once again, it's all about licensed spectrum now available. Previously it was not available to you, now it is. With the latest technologies available, we're able to break through what were previously seen as barriers for good millimeter wave radio propagation and to fight against inclement weather. And you get being millimeter wave, you get very, very high capacity, so fiber-like service. That's it.
Thank you, Andreas.
Very good. Is there any way that shifts over a little more? If not, don't worry about it.
You want to switch places with me?
No, it's not a big deal. Not like I actually want to. Thank you, Pete.
Careful.
All right, that's great. Thank you. First and foremost, I really appreciate WISPA allowing me to participate, and thank you all for being here. Looking forward to the start of a good conference here. So I'm going to be speaking about, well, let's start here. Let's see a show of hands. Who knows what licensed wireless spectrum is? We're crushing it here as starting this week. I'm going to be speaking about two options, as Kyriakos alluded to as well, that I think are most germane to the wireless ISP industry, fully licensed options. Those two options are going to be CBRS priority access licenses, the second tier of the band, if you're familiar with the three-tier hierarchy, and millimeter wave, standardized and non-standardized. So that includes 24, 28, 37, 39, and on the non-standardized side, 31 gigahertz, which is the LMDS band, also known as local multi-point distribution service. Oh, it's going just one way here. Is there any way I can back up? Can you back up from your side?
Yeah.
It's like, sorry about that.
That right?
Here we go. Yeah, this is perfect. So for those of you that need a refresher, although I'm sure everyone's familiar with it, CBRS, Citizens Broadband Radio Service, the frequency ranges from 3.55 to 3.7 gigahertz. You have a total of 150 megahertz. Split mostly, putting aside the incumbents, between the priority access licenses, which are 10 megahertz each, 7 10 megahertz channels in each county, which were auctioned in auction 105 about 4 or 5 years back, I guess. Then the additional 80 megahertz being the general authorized access tier, the GAA tier, which most people can operate without a license as long as you're using Part 96 compliant equipment, which there's going to be a ton of vendors that are Part 96 compliant in the Expo Hall this week. Millimeter wave, as I described, let's just say 24 through 39 gigahertz. And Let's start maybe with CBRS. I mean, I think CBRS is one of the first opportunities to gain access to carrier-grade spectrum at an economical price that is justifiable for a wireless ISP, whether you're big, small, or medium. On the millimeter wave side, as Kyriakos said, you have a ton of inventory that has come into the market via a few different pools, if you will. That being said, there has been millimeter wave spectrum available in the past, but you really haven't had the technology that can really harness it in a way to justify it and provide the performance that a wireless ISP would be looking to provide to its customers. The millimeter wave band, millimeter wave bands, I've been speaking at other shows too, including oil and gas, and I've been speaking about it for years, is that, if you have a contained area and you need, a high capacity, it's a perfect option, right? One of the pitfalls prior were the propagation characteristics, which Kyriakos alluded to. And it seems like some new technology that's hitting the market mitigates that and kind of changes the landscape a bit in comparison to what we're used to. CBRS, really flexible licensing. We have folks that have PALs. Do we have a show of hands? Does anybody hold, any wireless ISPs hold priority access licenses? So you participated in auction 105. You had the little key fob and all of that. Congratulations. It was a complex auction. And we're seeing a lot of players that are utilizing PALs up to 40 megahertz, which is the spectral aggregation limit in the PAL portion of the band. That doesn't mean you also can't take advantage opportunistically some of the GAA channels as well. Low interference. I'm always reluctant to say absolutely no interference, but low interference, especially in the dedicated exclusive use blocks on the PAL portion of the band. Same deal in millimeter wave, however, you don't have a shared tier similar to GAA, so you can have fully licensed dedicated use blocks across those millimeter wave bands. And versatile infrastructure, again, when you walk the show floor out there, you can have a lot of 3GPP options, your LTE, your 5G, your Nokias, Ericssons, Bicell, so on and so forth. And then you're going to have things on the proprietary side as well that work really good in the wireless ISP industry, among other industries, including things like Tirana and Cambium, and other options that are not true. Oh, it is. Oh, for CBRS. You guys have a CBRS product now too? Oh, for millimeter wave, yeah. No, this is CBRS. Prior to, this is all of Kyriakos' presentation was news to me, so this was made prior to seeing his presentation, so in my defense. But prior to these new products hitting the industry, millimeter wave has traditionally been a really good option for wireless backhaul, considering the capacity that it's able to handle. Bulk bands, really ideal for expanding coverage, easily obtainable, again, economical. We're going to talk about, as it relates to CBRS especially, the licenses were auctioned as county size. And what we're seeing is folks are able to lease coverage areas that are tailored to where their subscribers are, rather than having to take the entirety of the county. Hey, I only need the northeast portion of the county, that's where my customers are. That's all I'm going to lease, that's all I'm going to buy, whatever it may be. And I think the same goes for millimeter wave, right? Is that, you don't have to take this really wide, broad geographic service area. You can kind of tailor it and zone it into where your subscribers are. Just like Kyriakos mentioned, focus on some MDUs or where you have some population concentrations within your footprint. This, it's doing like 4 or 5 at a time. I'm sorry, Steve.
That's why I'm here.
We're going to go back to the map, if you don't mind. So really quick here, this is not the universe, but I wanted to give a sense to the participants of what the priority access license availability looks like on a nationwide scale. So this is a spectral depth map. You can see, at least 10 megahertz in every county across the country. Actually, I have to say one thing. As of recently, we do not have coverage in Montezuma County. So sorry for anybody that's looking for it in Montezuma, but we no longer have 10 megahertz there. But pretty much everywhere else, we have 10 megahertz, and all the way up to 70 megahertz in some areas. So just to be clear, this is not the universe of PAL availability. This is what Select Spectrum is aware of and what we offer. However, as you may imagine, there's other license holders out there that are socializing their spectrum for sale or lease as well. Let's see, let's skip on here. Oh, there we go. So who holds these PALs, especially those that are socializing them with the market for lease or sale? Many WISPs who purchased PALs participated in auction 105, either they found a really good deal for adjacent counties, they plan to move into counties in the future, whatever it may be, but they didn't follow through with those plans for one reason or another, and they're looking to either lease or sell those. Fiber providers too, we're seeing a lot of that. You know, fiber providers that participated in the auction and wanted to leverage wireless, but it didn't really pan out that way. So again, they're looking for a return on their investment and marketing them for sale or lease. You had your typical investors and auction speculators that basically purchase the stuff and invest in wireless spectrum to earn a return. So you have a lot of that as well. And then you have the cable companies. If anyone's familiar with the participants in the auction, you had pretty much all the big cable companies that participated in their respective neck of the woods. The one thing I guess I'd say to that is the cable companies are typically reluctant to lease to a party that is going to provide competitive services to what they're doing. So if you're working with a cable company and you say, hey, I'm going for a fixed wireless application, it's likely they probably won't want to proceed. But again, we shouldn't rule it out or foreclose on it unless we have that conversation. And aside from that, some large nationwide carriers, either tier 1, tier 2, whatever you want to call them, that participated in the auction and are willing to sell or lease that. So what are we seeing in the CBRS space? Auction 105, just to recap, 271 parties participated. You had about 228 parties that actually came away with licenses. Some of the winners include WISPs, winning licenses in their respective footprints. What we're seeing especially, and I'd be interested in hearing from wireless ISPs, is we're even seeing some folks that hold PALs that are opting not to light up their PALs and operate in GAA for the moment. And the reason being is so they can obtain wider channel sizes rather than being limited to 20 megahertz contiguous if they had 2 PALs, if you will, in the upper portion of the band. I think we'll see that change over time as we see more utilization in the band, but for now we're seeing a lot of that. Aside from that, GAA is free, right? So folks will opt for that. Many rural areas, the majority of the GAA is free. There could be up to 150 megahertz available, especially if the PALs aren't being leveraged, considering the use it or lose it dynamic in the band. We're seeing an increase of WISPs leasing and purchasing PALs in the secondary market. This can be for a variety of reasons, including but not limited to BEAD and the changes that have occurred recently there, future-proofing their network, and maybe paranoia around the CBRS band getting congested and not being able to access the channels that they rely on. And that hits my next bullet as well, which is GAA congestion. So this is just a really quick graphic. There's a lot going on here, but really what I wanted to show is a point that I made earlier is that, if you have a county-sized license, you can lease a portion of it, right? And no matter how big it is. And to give you a sense of scale, I mean, we're leasing to parties that are just want to encompass a warehouse or a manufacturing facility or an arena or a stadium or a college campus. So no matter how big or small, PAL license holders are willing to, what the term is called geographically partition the license to provide that coverage wherever you want. So in this scenario here, you have the blue outer shade, which is the county. You have the PAL licensee who wants to operate in a portion of the county you see in the northwest of that county. They're leasing the northeast of that county, and then the lessee is subleasing to another party within that county, and then you have a PAL reservation area in the southwest, and another monetized area in the southeast portion of the county. So, I mean, in the CBRS band especially, because of the propagation characteristics, we're seeing the ability to have adjacent deployments without permeating into one another, and everyone being able to operate within one single county. All right, getting into some millimeter wave options. So again, some of the standardized bands, not to say that you have to use 3GPP equipment, because obviously we just learned that there's non-3GPP equipment that's available as well, but some 24, 28, 37, and 39 gigahertz. There was a lot of activity, I guess, I want to say maybe 6-7 years ago, where these licenses existed. They ran an incentive auction for old, what they call RSA holders, which were the legacy licenses, to basically cash those in or use them as vouchers in, I guess that was auction 101, participate and obtain these new PEA-size licenses? County-size licenses that came out of auction 101, 102, if I'm remembering correctly. You have LMDS, Local Multi-Point Distribution Service, the 31 gigahertz band, and I'm not going to get into the weeds on how that 31 gigahertz got separated from the other bunch, but come to me after if you want to discuss. But you got 31 gigahertz as well, available via some of the pads that Kyriakos mentioned before. Again, available for lease, sometimes purchase. You have a lot of new pools of inventory coming to the market as of recent, really enabling WISPs to take advantage of these options. And wholesale capacity opportunities. So one that, again, Kyriakos already mentioned, Broadband One, providing a very unique opportunity for wireless ISPs to take advantage of these millimeter wave frequencies. Due to propagation characteristics, like I mentioned, traditionally we're ideal in population concentration where you have population density, but in consideration of the new technology, it looks like we're kind of coming outside of that box and being able to go a bit further with this spectrum.
Okay, so thank you very much. Thanks all three of you. Let me start with a couple of questions, and I'm going to start with the one that Pete gave us, which some of you have touched on in terms of here's what's going on with 6 gigahertz, here's what's going on in millimeter wave, and here's what's going on with CBRS. But talk about the pros and cons of each of those bands. Pete, why don't you get us started?
Well, I'm most familiar with the 6 gigahertz AFC band, and I have some familiarity with CBRS, so I can compare those. Be interested to hear how those compare to the millimeter wave band. But as I see it, CBRS and 6 gigahertz do have some similarities or similar use cases for the fixed wireless access backhaul networks and such. CBRS, as I understand it, has higher power, 47 dBm for 10 megahertz, whereas 6 gigahertz you have a maximum of 36 dBm. One of the advantages, though, of 6 gigahertz is that there, at least for standard power, there's 850 megahertz of spectrum available, whereas there's only 150 for CBRS. So you do have much wider bandwidths. One of the other advantages of CBRS is, as Andreas was talking about, you have priority access licenses, so you have the ability to have reserved spectrum for you. 6 gigahertz, you're at the mercy of fixed service licensees that may or may not come in the future, preventing you from using spectrum as well. On the other hand, there is so much spectrum available at 6 gigahertz. It's, unless you're in very highly congested areas or sitting on a microwave tower that is already congested at 6 gigahertz, it's very, we've seen a lot of good success with the 6 gigahertz. I think I hit most of the high points there.
You guys want to jump in on that?
Okay, well, in comparison to what Pete has laid out, millimeter wave bands combined with these latest technologies such as hybrid massive beamforming, the main advantage, I touched upon them in what I said earlier. Bottom line, you get not only much higher capacity links, so much more of a fiber-like experience compared to sub 6 gigahertz and 5G. Even 5G 3GPP compliant systems in millimeter wave bands, honestly, if they're not doing hybrid massive beamforming, which 5G and our 3GPP systems are not doing right now, then you're not going to be able to achieve the kind of performance you need. So it's basically more capacity than anything else out there in the wireless world. To offer fiber-like service, it's talking about fiber-like service, also very low latency and very, very secure. You've got not being licensed millimeter wave spectrum. That means it's not unlicensed, it's not Wi-Fi, so you don't get spoofing. It's licensed spectrum, so generally speaking, it is very secure. In many cases, you've got proprietary air interfaces, so security is definitely an advantage to them.
I think they covered it.
Okay, let me ask you this question, Andreas. It wasn't one that you had on the list, but you should be able to handle this. Describe what's the process when you go about leasing spectrum from a license holder like Dish or somebody else that might be making it available.
Yeah, absolutely, great question. So, I mean, it's actually quite simple, in that, you know, we're gonna wanna identify exactly what you're looking for, like specifically. If it's a full county, say Hartford County, Connecticut, that's easy. But if it's something less than a county, we're gonna need to understand exactly what that coverage area is. So that usually comes in the form factor of, I don't know, a shapefile, a KML, however you wanna do it. We need a map of exactly what the coverage area is. Aside from that, some of the terms, non-economic, non-monetary terms. So, you know, are you looking for a lease? Do you prefer a purchase? Right? If it's a lease, how many years are you looking for example's sake? Once we have that information, we're able to basically obtain a quote for your review and consideration. Once you have, let's skip a lot of the steps in between there. Once you have a handshake on economics and terms, you're basically going to look to execute a lease agreement with the party. If it's a lease, you're going to negotiate that. Counsel such as Mr. Steve Coran will handle that portion. Once you get to a mutually satisfactory agreement, both parties execute it. You have a fully executed agreement. You're going to go file that lease application with the FCC. The FCC, depending on how you file it, whether long-term de facto or short-term or spectrum manager or light touch, it'll take a certain amount of time to get that lease approved by the FCC. Once the FCC approves, you have something called final order. And how I describe final order is, you know, you get married in the church and the priest says, hey, if anyone opposes this marriage, speak up now. That's what the FCC is doing. And that period lasts about 41 days. Once that period, final order, has been satisfied, and keep in mind, the parties may choose to waive that mutually. It's almost like waiving a home inspection. You can waive it. But if you keep it, at the end of that 41 days, you basically can close on the transaction, which would result in you being able to obtain the channel that you just negotiated for, channel or channels.
Okay, great. Kyriakos, tell us what's going on with millimeter wave around the world. You had a slide on that, but if you can give a little more detail on where things stand. Yes, sure. What is happening in other markets around the world with respect to millimeter wave?
Okay. Again, it's all, as Andreas mentioned before, some point-to-point applications with millimeter wave spectrum have been around for quite a long time. But the latest generation technologies enable point-to-multipoint capabilities, and you're seeing a lot of millimeter wave point-to-multipoint being deployed in Europe right now. Europe was probably, in this case, normally they take their time over doing anything, but in this case, they started a little earlier than other places. So you now have, I know of WISPs in Europe, and I'm talking about WISPs, not tier 1 carriers, who have gone up to 600,000 subscribers on point-to-multipoint millimeter wave today, and growing, you know, massively every month. You're beginning to see massive movement in places like India, Geo-Alliance and others pushing the envelope. Again, we're talking about millions and millions of connections with millimeter wave, something that was being unheard of only a few years ago. So it's taking off pretty much all over the globe.
Pete, let me come back to you. What sort of interference are you seeing in 6 gigahertz? Are you seeing anything, or is it just it works? The AFC does what it's supposed to do.
Well, to answer your last question, AFC is doing its job.
Good.
There have been a few reports of interference. Comsearch seems to, because we are frequency coordinators for point-to-point microwave, we hear a lot of things that come in through the back door, so to speak, people experiencing interference, and they ask us to take a look at, you know, like, hey, is there a new licensed microwave system nearby that is causing this interference? And we're actually coaching them to that slide that I showed earlier, right? Hey, you know, if you're getting interference, you want to get that clock started. If it happens to be Wi-Fi based interference or standard power device interference, get your data up into that portal, because that starts us taking a look at one easy thing for us to do, look and see what devices are in our AFC that could potentially be causing interference. Now that said, there have been, I'm going to ignore the Miami case that started before AFC even happened. So ignoring that one, there's only been 3 official reports to that portal. One was in Council Bluffs, Iowa, which actually was an issue where a device was operating on faulty firmware, and once the FCC located that device and they got the firmware re-updated, it started operating on the channels that the AFC started said to do. So it ended up being a device issue, not the process issue, but that showed that that portal worked. The second one that came in was in Boise, Idaho, Idaho Public Safety or something, the state of Idaho. We have not heard back. I've reached out several times to see if they've gotten a resolution, and they have not heard. The third one identified a sort of backdoor, a gap in how the FCC and ISED in Canada license links, because we found that in Rainier, Minnesota, there's a cross-border link that the AFCs were not protecting because it was not in the FCC ULS and it was not in the ISED download that we get. So the gap was that Canada was giving the AFCs the receiver locations within Canada, and the FCC licenses by transmitter, so they show what the Canadian side receiver is. I quickly downloaded the full set of Canada data, identified 29 such situations, forwarded it to the ISED and to the FCC, and about 4 weeks later, we got a new data set from the FCC for those 29 locations to protect. I reached out, and that was about September 20th that they instructed the AFCs to load this data set in. And I contacted them, they replied last Friday, and the interference is still there. So they have not been able to identify the source of the interference. Now, there could be other things. There's low power indoor devices, there's other sources of interference that could be caused, but those are the three that we know about and that have been officially reported. There is a fourth that APCO came to us and asked us about. I looked in our AFC, didn't see anything, but I kept telling them, like, hey, go report it to the portal, and they have yet to do so. It wasn't APCO, but it was one of their constituents that needed to file it, but in Ohio. But we're kind of waiting on that one to come through. I'm not sure exactly what's going on, but that's where it is. So far, we are actually, the AFC is working as intended.
Great. Any questions? Step up to the mic, please. You can queue it behind it if you want.
Yeah, hi.
Let's turn it on.
I don't have my glasses on.
There you go.
Hi, just out of curiosity, just maybe my ignorance, but can you shed a bit of light on loss attenuation in building for millimeter wave propagation?
Hi. So with millimeter wave, one thing that's an absolute rule is that you want line of sight. So that means you will, if you want to do it properly, they have tried to do it with internal, like through the window, whatever, CPs. It hasn't worked very well at all. It's been a failure. So you always need to make sure you have line of sight and you've got an antenna outside of the building. That's a prerequisite.
Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? Yep. First of all, great discussion. I learned a lot. I really appreciate it. This question is for Kyriakos and for Andreas. So you mentioned 37 gigahertz. Are you talking about 37.0 to 37.6, known as the lower gigahertz? As you know, in April of this year, the FCC adopted an order for the notice of proposed rulemaking that is opening up 37.0 to 37.6 for manual coordination, licensed by rule kind of use, nationwide, non-exclusive licensing. Or are you also talking about the upper 37, which is 37.6 to above? And that is exclusive use licensing. And how does that fit within Kyriakos' vision or understanding of the interest of parties to lease spectrum to others?
So thank you for that. So the answer is both. The lower part of the band, absolutely, once it's opened up, it will certainly be worthwhile. And with these new technologies that have emerged that I mentioned earlier, you will now be able to do things with that spectrum that you were previously not able to do. So it's certainly something to keep in mind. But with the licensed spectrum, obviously the higher part of the band, you have that extra security of being within a licensed context. And particularly today when you do have, again, as of fairly recently, lots of licensed spectrum that is becoming available through groups such as Broadband One, Andreas himself, and GeoLinks, etc.
And so, Andreas, do you see that when you mapped out what the benefits of the CBRS GAA are in this, in the presentation that you made? Do you see, because this is 37.0 to 37.6 is licensed by work, do you see that as playing a similar role as CBRS GAA?
Great question. I honestly hadn't thought about it until you mentioned it. To be clear, the 37 gigahertz I was mentioning was that was auctioned some years back, so not the lower portion of the band that's being contemplated now. I would imagine that it's going to be somewhat similar, right? Enabling folks to use it that didn't have an opportunity way back when to participate in whether it was auction 101 or 102. I don't recall at this point in time.
Okay. Any other questions from, there you go.
Thanks, Steve. For Andreas, you mentioned you had a nice little diagram about the spectrum partitioning and disaggregation balance. So in that one, Andreas, how is it? I think I have the answer, but I just wondered if you can clarify. If you are a PAL holder and you want to, sublease it, who has to follow the rules in terms of meeting the criteria as far as number of connections and backhaul links and so forth that fall within the rule of the original PAL license? So in that top left, does the lessee still have to figure out are they still meeting the criteria before they were to sublease? How does that work?
It's a great question. I mean, depending on the coverage area that's being leased, I mean, it may not be feasible for the lessee to meet the substantial service requirements, right? If it's such a small area. That being said, going to the other end, if they're going to take a larger area where if they were going to serve it, it would be feasible. It would depend on the what kind of transaction it was. So I don't know if you guys cover this in legal, but long-term de facto lease typically means that you're passing those obligations off to the lessee to meet those substantial service requirements of the FCC. But in a spectrum manager classification of the lease, the license holder is retaining those obligations. I hope that answers it.
Bottom line is the licensee is the one who always remains obligated to the FCC to meet the obligations. So you want to make sure that you cover that in your agreement.
To Steve's point, right? Even if you do a spectrum manager, right? If someone isn't meeting substantial services, who's gonna lose the license? Who's that fault license holder?
Yeah, we don't want that. Any other questions? I've got a few more up here, but I'd rather have you guys ask them.
I actually kind of have a question about the 37 gigahertz stuff, because obviously we're looking at trying to get that opened up. One of the questions internally people have been asking is there equipment available today that can hit the 37.0, 37.6, number one, and what kind of demand would there be in the United States for that spectrum?
I think the answer to the first question also answers the second question, right? That given that now there is the technology that enables the millimeter wave bands, including the 37 gig, you will certainly, in my opinion, you will certainly see lots of demand. Whereas previously the technologies weren't there, couldn't propagate properly, you had issues with the weather. So I don't think there will be much demand in that kind of context.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Yeah, one more. Given we have these experts up, the big elephant in the room, in CBRS, Big Beautiful Bill, and some of the other competing industry interests. Kind of three questions. What do you guys see as far as where things will land in CBRS with regard to the Big Beautiful Bill? Number two, higher power, do you think the higher power requirement, the lobbying for higher power in CBRS is going to come to fruition given the competing interests and issues there? And then on the same for the 6 gigahertz bandwidth, I think there's a consensus that Wi-Fi is an American success story, and so will the 6 gigahertz band be protected given its exponentially benefit to the Wi-Fi ecosystem.
So to the extent you guys don't want to or can't answer those questions, I will encourage you all to come to the Spectrum update Wednesday morning at 8:30. And there is also a separate CBRS panel that's going to be Thursday at 1:30, where we're going to talk about what's happening there from a legislative or regulatory standpoint. But if you want to handle some of the other questions, please do.
I'm happy to speak afterward. I don't want to take the shine from the two panels, but I'm happy to share my opinion afterward, BJ. I appreciate the question. But I don't know if you want to touch on the 6 gigahertz.
On the 6 gigahertz, I can only parrot what I've seen in the news that you guys all read, and that's basically everything I've heard coming out of the administration is that 6 gigahertz is here to stay. I mean, like both sides of the aisle seem to be like, we're not touching 6 gigahertz. I did have a conversation with someone in the FCC that is in the know, and he was like, yeah, in his opinion, he was like, he wants to actually add more spectrum to unlicensed so they can get another 320 megahertz channel. So I'm not sure how you do that, but maybe go up to 7250 instead of 7155. But regardless, I have not heard anything that is negative towards unlicensed 6.
Question? All right, any other questions? Do you guys want to do 30 seconds, 1 minute, wrap up, leave these folks with some great thoughts? We should have picked on to go first. What do you think? Go ahead, you look ready.
I look ready, but I have no idea how to wrap this up other than, 6 gigahertz has been working. I look forward to meeting everyone. If you guys have any questions about 6 gigahertz AFC in general and the standards and specifications that I had in my presentation, I'd be happy to talk to you. Thank you.
My last thought, it just came up, is we talk about with the latest millimeter wave technologies, the latest developments with spectrum has become recently available. There's a lot of talk about fiber-like performance and the fiber-like service. And you know what? Also thinking about the downside of this, not always looking at the optimistic or the positive picture, but also at the possible inconveniences of millimeter wave used with the latest technologies. That's saying, really, you should think of it as you would fiber. With unlicensed band FWA, you have almost zero pain starting off in the deployment because you have no complexities in getting the licensing, no cash drain, you have to acquire licenses, etc., etc. But then, more often than not, believe me, I've done in my 30 years in this business, I've done lots of unlicensed. Whether you like it or not, whatever technology you use, you eventually end up having to deal with the complexities of successfully running a network with unlicensed spectrum. And it does become complex. The more successful you are, the more subscribers you bring onto the network, the more complex it becomes. Whereas with fiber or with licensed millimeter wave spectrum, it's the other way around. You've got to do some homework up front, you've got to handle some costs up front and some of the intricacies of the licensing and this and that. But once you're up and running, that network is bulletproof, and you will not have headaches in the long run. So either case is a good one. It has its complexities and its challenges. You just need to look at both cases very well and choose the right one for your specific addressable market.
Perfect.
I would say that I would encourage everyone to evaluate these options. I think we covered the two most viable options that are available to wireless ISPs. I mean, we've done a lot of business case, generate a lot of business cases, and both options, CBRS and millimeter wave, are justifiable for wireless ISPs. Another thing that I mentioned is, I mean, expanding on Kyriakos' analogy before, I mean, these are all different tools. When you go out and fix something, you don't go out there just with a screwdriver, right? You can't hammer and nail this with a screwdriver, and you can't screw with a hammer. So it's okay to use different things in conjunction for your network. And again, you know, they are very economical, and I think a lot of you will be surprised when looking at these license options in comparison to some other traditional license spectrum options that have been available in the past.
Great, so let's give our panelists a round of applause. Good job.